They were shook up because they saw this hand writing on the wall. And it says Belshazzar's knees smote one against the other. Very quaint. It's a fulfillment of prophecy. I'll show you why. It's why I wanted to work this in. But what the Persians skillfully did, a genius plan, at the right time to divert the Euphrates to another canal system that lowered the water levels, and the army was able to slip in and take over the city. There were people in town that didn't know they'd been taken over for 3 days. And this handwriting appeared on the wall.
That is mind-blowing. Chuck Missler explains the fall of Babylon, guys, and this is absolutely fascinating. He has so many intricate foreshadowings and beautiful reasonings behind it all, and let's get right into it, guys, and I know that this will fascinate you.
And he makes a big mistake. During the party, he has his guys go over to the museum and bring in the temple implements that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple 70 years earlier. And he uses them for party tools. Well, that was offensive to the God of the universe. Bad news, not a smart move. So they're all shook up because they see the fingers of a man's hand writing on the wall. And we'll come to that in a minute. I have to insert something here. I think I can squeeze this in. Whenever I'm teaching Daniel 5, I usually try sometime prior to the chapter to work in an anecdote that I heard when I was at the Naval Academy, apocryphal story about Lord Nelson. And Lord Nelson, of course, was a much admired British admiral. And the story goes that the midshipman came in and said, Lord Nelson, there's a French galleon off the port bow. And Lord Nelson says, well, sound general quarters, get me my red waistcoat. So they sound general quarters, puts a red waistcoat on, and they, of course, engage the French ship and sink it. And a week later, the midshipman comes in and says, Lord Nelson, there's 2 French frigates off the port quarter. Says, give me my red waistcoat, sound general quarters, which they do, and he does, and they sink it again. So after the battle, the midshipman comes in and says, Lord Nelson, request permission to ask a question, sir. He says, certainly, son, that's the way you learn things. He says, I notice every time we go into battle, you ask for your red waistcoat. Why do you do that, sir? Well, I always wear a red waistcoat so that in case I should sustain a hit, I don't want the crew distracted by the sight of my blood.
Smart.
Pretty impressed. So a few days later, the midshipman comes into the cabin. Lord Nelson, the entire French Navy is on the horizon. He says, sign general quarters and get me my brown breeches.
Oh, he got jokes. That's hilarious. I love it when people like Chuck or John Lennox makes jokes because it's just 10 times more funny coming from them.
They work that silly little story in because what you discover in the quaintness of the King James language, when these fingers of the man's hand is writing on the wall, it says they didn't know, they were shook up because they saw this hand writing on the wall. And it says Belshazzar's knees smote one against the other. Very quaint.
Oh, wow.
I don't think that can be improved upon even in the modern translations. But it also says his loins were loosed. And in the politeness of the King James, you can just read that and not really relate to that. But if I say to you that he asked for his brown breeches, you understand what I'm saying, right? And some of you are saying, well, gee, Chuck, you're getting a little crude here to get into that. No, it's a fulfillment of prophecy.
Wow.
It's a fulfillment of prophecy. I'll show you why. It's why I wanted to work this in a polite way without being too offensive here. Anyway, Daniel is called, because they can't interpret it, the queen mother, I believe it was Nebuchadnezzar's widow, was still present, aged, of course. She reminds her grandson that back in his grandfather's day, there was a guy that had a gift of interpreting. And so they called Daniel out of retirement. And they promised him all kinds of wonderful things if he can interpret. And he does a great speech. He first of all eulogizes Belshazzar's grandfather. He says, now your grandfather there was a king, not you.
Wow.
Punk. It's sort of the flavor of his talk. But he tells it what a great king he was. But he says, you keep your rewards. But then he interprets this strange writing on the wall. Now, what they don't know is going on is the Persian army had succeeded in diverting the Euphrates, which protected the city, and I'll show you in a minute how. And they just slipped in under the gates and took the city over.
That's crazy.
And but in the meantime, at this big party, this is to give you a feeling for it, Babylon itself had a double moat. There was an outer city wall with a moat, and all fed by the Euphrates. And in fact, as you look at Babylon itself, you'll see that the Euphrates, it really literally straddled the Euphrates where it used to be in those days. It's moved a little to the west in modern times. But it not only provided water to the city in terms of a siege, it also provided the moat that was protective. But what the Persians skillfully did by their ingenious plan, they were able, at the right time, to divert the Euphrates to another canal system that lowered the water levels, and the army was able to slip in and take over the city.
It's so weird, like, war during that time. I wonder if they're just like, well, I guess we have a new rulership. I guess someone else is in charge now. I don't know if it was like that. It's probably much worse. But he gets into saying that there wasn't really any war. They just took over. Like, they were trapped somehow. Fascinating stuff.
And so this is the city proper, if you will. And there is the processional way that is so fabled in literature, and it has been rebuilt today. I'll show you pictures of that. The Tower of Babel, which Nebuchadnezzar put Entemenaki, his version of it, on top of it.
This is
and
so cool.
Those ruins are still there. And we have a temple of Marduk and some other things still. There are all kinds of temples. I'll spare you all the minor ones.
Wow.
The king's palace is right up there next to the citadel up in the front. So in any case, on October 12th, Cyrus general conquers Babylon without a battle. And I'll show you the handwriting on the wall here in a minute. The Persians, as I say, diverted the river. Herodotus describes this, that the water level dropped to the middle of a man's thigh and rendered the flood defenses useless. And they just slipped in. There were people in town that didn't know they'd been taken over for 3 days. So the point I want to make, there's no battle. They just took it over by cleverness. But we have this expression, he saw the handwriting on the wall, as a figure in our language. It's amazing how many terms in our common vocabulary come from Daniel, and specifically from this chapter. Are there hidden codes in the Bible? Many people ask me about Bible codes. Sure, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing and the honor of kings, or duty of kings, to search out a matter. And one of the first cryptographers in history is Daniel. And this handwriting appeared on the wall, if we recognize this, at least in the Talmudic traditions. And the question is, and of course, all the experts couldn't read it. And the Talmud would argue the reason they couldn't, it was written vertically and backwards. Okay?
What?
And so there are...
So they think God's hand wrote this on the wall, and it was in Hebrew, but backwards. That's fascinating. And only, of course, Daniel could read it. But it's also so fascinating to think about the hand of God and his power to allow things to happen. Like, if God promises judgment, or God has said, your time is up, and you think, how in the world could this possibly be? How could this actually happen? He could easily make a way, like the Persians did to the Babylonians.
Forms of encryption in Hebrew. There are more than just two, but there's two classic ones. One's called Albam. They take the Hebrew alphabet and they slip it. They take half of it and slide it over the other half, and you just transpose.
Wow. Instead
of the aleph, you get the lamed and so forth. And wherever you have, by just transposing those letters, you can encrypt. It's a very simple form, easy form break. But that Albam is used several times in the Bible, by the way, in Isaiah 7 and Jeremiah 51, to give you some. Now, there's another form of encryption called Atbash. And that's where you do the same thing, except you put the second half backwards. But you do a simple transposition kind of thing. It's called Atbash. And these are classic. To people who study cryptography, they're just considered historical oddities.
Wow.
But if someone has a supernatural perception of the Scripture, then these are signposts of something deeper. But in any case, handwriting on the wall. If we take the ancient traditions, Hebrew traditions, that it's a form of Atbash encryption, which some people, then that means that these letters, using an Atbash transcription, would occur the way Daniel interpreted them, which would be many, many tekel pares. And many means numbered or reckoned. And Daniel interprets that word meaning to imply, God hath numbered thy kingdom and had finished it. Or the way we would translate that, your number is up. Right?
Wow. Yeah, and just like that, if God commands something or says something will happen, you think, oh, it's just because a kingdom's coming to attack. But no, he knows all things, and he just allows things to happen in a way that is definitely judgment upon whoever the people is. Just like he used the Babylonians to judge the Israelites, and he used the Persians to judge the Babylonians.
The second word, many is there twice for emphasis. The third word is tekel, which means weighed. And Daniel interprets that saying, thou art weighed and the balances are found wanting. So from the one word, he gives them the interpretation, the homiletic, if you will. The last word may confuse you in the King James translation because the word is described as Perez at first, but when it's interpreted, it says Upharsin. And someone, now you read that in the transliterated King James, and you wonder, where's Perez go? You is the conjunction and Pharsin is the plural of Perez. So the word is first introduced a few verses earlier as Perez, but when Daniel interprets it, he puts it in the plural. That's all that's going on there. And that means broken or divided. He says, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes.
Wow.
There's also a play on words in here because the vowels, of course, are inferred in both Chaldean and Hebrew. And these are assuming an E inference. If you take an A inference, paras happens to be the word for Persians. And so it's interesting, a play on words, if you will. But obviously, this is Daniel interpreting this cryptic writing on the wall that's got this whole banquet, of course, in panic. Well, it's interesting. It's about 12 days later that Cyrus makes his grand entrance. His general has conquered the city, taken over. Cyrus and his entourage comes. Josephus records Daniel greeting Cyrus and presenting to Cyrus a scroll of Isaiah. And what is in the scroll of Isaiah is a letter to Cyrus written 150 years earlier.
No way. Now this is something that is wild. Just imagine the foreshadowing here. The Bible's awesome. There's so many prophecies constantly happening all the time that just blows me away. How can you not think that the Bible is more than just a book?
Where Cyrus was born. And this is in Josephus. What makes this letter so provocative is it addresses Cyrus by name. It highlights his career and addresses him by name. And this was, Isaiah wrote this, as I say, 150 years before he was born. And here's what it says in Isaiah. It's in Isaiah 44, 45, last part of chapter 44, early part of 45. That saith to the deep, this be God, that saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. Oh, that's interesting. Thus saith of Cyrus, oh, there's my name. He is my shepherd. He shall perform my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid.
No way.
So it predicts Cyrus's name, and that
No way. That's crazy. I did not know this part. I did not know that part about the Bible, how Isaiah literally wrote this, and Daniel handed it literally a letter that was written 150 years before he conquered it. That is mind-blowing.
he'll free them to go home. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, to his anointed. Here is, in the Old Testament, a Gentile called the anointed of God. That's interesting. Whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. I will loose the loins of kings. A strange phrase. You may miss that otherwise. What that tells you is that incident that I mentioned in Daniel chapter 5 didn't just happen. It was a publicly known embarrassment because Cyrus would have heard about it. You follow me?
Crazy.
That puts this.
That's crazy. I want to look up what does loose of the loins. It says loose of the loins is a biblical phrase often used figuratively to describe a state of being weak and vulnerable, deprived of strength and power. In the context of kings, it signifies their power and authority being taken away.
See, I will loose the loins of kings. I love the precision of God's word. To open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I'll go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I'll break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. I will give thee the treasures of darkness and the hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. Can you imagine being a conquering king and conquering these people and having them present this old dusty scroll with a letter written to you centuries before, more than a century before, outlining your career, your victory, and calling you by name? That's got to be wild.
Yeah.
I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me. You want to take Isaiah 45 and read on, because what follows is God generally doesn't argue for himself. From verse 1 on, the Bible just presumes God. There are a few cases where God, so to speak, puts his thumb under his suspenders and tells it like it is. And this is one of them. God really goes on here, and there's much that will pass to keep going here. But Cyrus's response, of course, he was impressed, wouldn't you be? Sure. So he freed the captives and returned the vessels that had been stolen from the temple 7 years before, the one that were used in this party. And then he tells them, not only can you go home, he gives them financial incentives to go home. He makes a big donation for the temple,
Wow.
and he gives them individually. Those that accept the return get a subsidy. Only less than 50,000 agree. A lot of the others were perfectly comfortable. They'd lived there for their life. Many of them were born in Babylon, so they stayed. But not quite 50,000 head back to start afresh back in Jerusalem. And that's really the story of Ezra and so forth. Now,
God's word does not return void. It is sharper than any two-edged sword. Whatever God says happens. If God promises something, it will come forth, and you definitely have to be sure of that. So we can trust in God and we can trust in his word, that we don't have to rely on our own strength. We can rely on God to always be with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. So I encourage you guys to trust in Jesus through it all, through the hard times, through the difficult times, through the pain and the suffering. Go to him because he cares for you. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to click the link in the description if you've never decided to follow Jesus. Do that today. It will be the best decision you could ever make. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and please remember Jesus loves you.